With so many great players in the NFL, the early rounds of fantasy football drafts seems like it's impossible to make a bad pick. Everyone looks at their team after the draft and claims that they've drafted the championship squad. Then, after about a month, half the league is looking back at the draft and trying to remember why they thought those were good picks to make in the first place. I'm here to make sure you aren't part of that half. I have one player from all four main positions that you're going to regret drafting at their ADP. The first player we're going to talk about is Mark Andrews, tight end for the Baltimore Ravens. Last season, after Travis Kelce, the drop-off in fantasy tight ends was a steep one. But despite that fact, Mark Andrews is being drafted in the middle of the third round this season. The majority of football fans would consider him to be the second best fantasy tight end, but that isn't really saying much. Last season, Kelce led fantasy tight ends in scoring with 19.2 points per game. Then there was a large drop-off after that. TJ Hawkinson was second with 13.3 points per game, and Andrews was third in the position with 12.7 points per game. I do need to point out that last season, Andrews had to deal with injuries, because the season before that, Andrews ended with 17.8 points per game, first place in the position. There is merit behind his current ADP, but the receiving options for the Ravens have changed since then. In 2021, Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown dominated targets for the Ravens, with over 50% of the targets going to just those two players. The Ravens go into this season with receivers that include 2021 first-round pick Rashad Bateman, 2023 first-round pick Zay Flowers, and the $15 million offseason signing of Odell Beckham Jr. That's a lot of receivers to feed for a team that has been bottom 5 in pass attempts in 3 of the last 4 seasons and is being led by a quarterback that's highest passing yard total ever is 3,127 yards. The second player we're going to look at is running back Joe Mixon from the Cincinnati Bengals. Mixon is currently being drafted around the 4 or 5 turn as the RB15. He finished last year as the RB12, and his backup, Samaje Perine, is no longer on the Bengals. Hearing that, I would immediately think that Joe Mixon is being undervalued at his position. Then you take a deeper look at it, and you realize why Mixon's being drafted lower than where he finished last year. First, let's look at his rushing stats. In 14 games, Mixon rushed for 814 yards and 7 touchdowns. Now let's look at his rushing stats when we take out this Week 9 game versus the Panthers. 661 yards and 3 touchdowns. That one game accounted for almost 20% of his total rushing yards and over 50% of his rushing touchdowns. A ridiculous amount for just one game. Mixon was also in the bottom 10 for average yards per carry among all running backs with 3.9 yards per carry. That's including the Panthers game where he averaged 7 yards per carry. Without that one game, he averages 3.6 yards per carry, the third worst in the entire league. The Bengals also went and drafted running back Chase Brown, who was 4th in rushing yards last season in college and 2nd in carries. He was a 5th round pick, so he's not an immediate threat to Mixon's touches, but once we're deep into the season and Brown is more adjusted to the NFL, it wouldn't be surprising to see the Bengals take touches away from their 7th-year declining running back and give them to their rookie running back who was a workhorse in college. Isaiah Pacheco was a 7th-round pick just last season, so a late-round rookie leading his team in carries isn't that far-fetched. It would be unfair if I didn't point out that Mixon was a great pass catcher last season, having career highs for receptions, targets, and receiving yards. That's great to see in PPR formats, but when a guy hits his career highs in his 6th year by such large amounts, it looks to me like more of an outlier, and we'll see Mixon's receiving stats regress back to what he's had in previous seasons. The next player we're going to look at is wide receiver Deebo Samuel from the San Francisco 49ers. After an amazing 2021 season, where Deebo had not only 1,400 receiving yards and 6 receiving touchdowns, but also 365 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns, Deebo regressed significantly. He only had 632 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns, along with 232 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns in 13 games. To put that into a per-game perspective, Deebo dropped from 110.6 total yards per game to 66.4 total yards per game. A big reason for Deebo's numbers dropping like that is that the 49ers made the biggest midseason move last year when they traded for running back Christian McCaffrey, who's arguably the best offensive player in the league besides Patrick Mahomes. Getting a player like that is going to create a huge change in any offense. Just look at these numbers before and after CMC joined the 49ers. Every offensive stat decreased for Deebo after McCaffrey joined. It isn't surprising to see that, but what is surprising is that Deebo's ADP is at the 35th pick, right at the end of the 3rd round in 12-team leagues. I haven't even mentioned Brandon Ayuk, who's going into his 4th season and has improved every single year of his career, or George Kittle, who's one of the top tight ends in the league, or running back Elijah Mitchell, who only played in 5 games last season after leading the 49ers in rushing the year before. The 49ers are one of the best football teams in the league. They have so many amazing players, but fantasy-wise, their players are risky because of all the amazing players, because they all deserve to have the ball in their hands. If you really want a piece of this offense and you're not in a position to draft CMC, then you should wait for Ayuk. He's being drafted 2 rounds later than Debo this year. The final player we're going to look at is quarterback Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills. In the past 3 seasons, Allen has finished as either the number 1 or 2 overall fantasy player. Saying not to draft him sounds insane, especially when he isn't even the first quarterback going off the board. But I'm saying not to draft him instead of Mahomes or Hurts because I believe both those players will be top 3 quarterbacks next season in fantasy, while I don't think Josh Allen will even be in the top 5. It's a bold prediction to make after witnessing him be one of the best players in the NFL these past few seasons, and I'm not making some absurd claim that Josh Allen's going to become a bad player or saying he's going to be injured, something that's impossible to predict. I have multiple reasons to back my claim. First is that there are multiple great quarterbacks in this league that have the potential to be quarterback 1 in fantasy this season. Besides Mahomes and Hurts, we have Burrow, Lamar, Fields, and Herbert as legitimate contenders, as well as dark horses like Lawrence, Tua, and even Deshaun Watson. I can see all of these guys being in the top 5 for fantasy quarterbacks next year, and the only ones being drafted around Allen are the 2 MVP candidates from last season. The value of someone like Herbert or Fields being taken in the mid-5th, while Allen is going in the late 2nd or early 3rd, that's a huge difference when it comes to an early round pick. Another reason that I think Allen's going to have a decline in fantasy this season is that the Bills have a new running back situation. A big factor for Josh Allen's elite play in both fantasy and real life is his running ability. He led the Bills in rushing TDs and had about 60 less yards than their RB1 Devin Singletary last year. Singletary's gone, and 2022 second-round pick James Cook takes over as the RB1. The Bills also signed Damian Harris, who had 15 rushing touchdowns just 2 seasons ago. This is the best RB room that the Bills have had since Josh Allen has ascended into elite player status. His rushing yards and TDs are very likely to go down this season. Josh Allen's ceiling is the number 1 player in fantasy. He isn't a bad pick by any means, but when there are players who you can draft 2 to 3 rounds later that have the same exact ceiling as him, it makes him not worth the pick at his current ADP. Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Didn't think anyone would come this far. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks.